I speak often, so frankly for me, the introductions are the highlight of the evening. And I have to say, I wish I could package Barbara Jones and take her with me wherever I go. Pleasant as it is to hear nice things said about you in public, there is a risk, of course, to one's mental health. The possibility that if you hear this stuff often enough, you may begin to believe it. So I'd like to begin with just a brief story about an occasion I had some introductions but was brought back down to earth. I spent 5 years in Northern Ireland working on the peace process there. I chaired 3 separate sets of negotiations. When I returned to this country, I wrote a book about my experience. When it was published, I went on a tour to promote sales of the book. I received many invitations, and I was surprised to learn something that most of you may not be surprised to hear, that in the United States, there are more Irish American organizations than there are Irish Americans. Having met many of you prior to the program, that may well be true of this audience as well. But I received invitations for almost all of them. I couldn't go to all, but I went to many. And as I traveled the entire country, being introduced at Irish American clubs and societies, they developed among them an informal competition as to who could give the longest, most fantastic, sometimes truly ridiculous introductions of them. The proper reaction, of course, would have been for me to show some humility, to ask them to keep it short. I had an improper reaction. I loved it. I encouraged them. I scolded them when they left something out. One guy from Chicago spent 35 minutes reading everything I'd done in my life, much of which I'd not been aware of until the announcement before the trial. And he left out something and I got up and criticized him. So by the time I got to the last stop, which was the Stamford, Connecticut Irish American Club, I was, how will I put it, overly impressed with myself. I had a hard time squeezing my head through the front door. When I got in, the first person I encountered was an elderly woman who rushed up to me, very excited and nervous, shook my hand vigorously, and she said, I've driven 3.5 hours to come here. She said, I don't live anywhere near you. All because I want to tell you what a great man you are, how much I admire all you've done in the world, and ask you, please, please, would you sign my poster? She handed me a poster with a big photograph on it, a pen. I looked at it. I said, I'd be very happy to sign your poster, but before I do, I think there's something I should tell you. And she asked what it was. She said, what is it? I said, well, I'm not Henry Kissinger. There's a big photograph of Kissinger. She said, you're not. She said, well, who are you anyway? And when I told her, she said, well, that's just terrible. She said, I drove 3.5 hours to meet a great man named Kissinger, and all I've got is a nobody like you. I said, well, I'm sorry you feel so bad. I wish there's something I could do to make you feel better. And she thought for a moment. She said, well, there is. When I asked what it was, she leaned forward. I leaned forward. Our foreheads were touching. In a conspiratorial whisper, she said, nobody will ever know the difference. She said, would you mind signing Henry Kissinger's name? So I did. And he's still hanging today in a living room in Eastern Connecticut. A daily reminder to me to breathe deeply when Barbara Jones introduces me, but don't believe the stuff she said. Well, it really is a true honor for me. As you heard earlier, my mother was born in Lebanon and was an immigrant to the United States. She came as a teenager. She had no education. She could not read, write, or speak English. She spent 50 years working the night shift in a textile mill. My father's parents came from Ireland just at the end of the 19th century. He was born here in the United States, but he never knew his parents. He was raised in an orphanage along with his other siblings. After several years in an orphanage, he was adopted by an elderly couple who ended up in a small town in Maine. On one side was a textile mill, and on the other side was the home in which my mother and her family lived. And so my father, who had no education, and my mother, who had no education, raised a family of 5 children, committed to the American dream. They lived their entire lives on the brink of economic failure. We were very poor. They died penniless. But in their minds, they were successful because their children all went to college. And each of us have lived lives that would have been beyond the imagination of our parents. I believe in the American dream because I have lived it. And I know now, after all of these years, that it was both the sacrifice and devotion of my Irish father and my Lebanese mother and the freedom of America that made it possible for me to do what I've done in my life, and as a result of that, to be standing here this evening. I believe that we are the most fortunate people ever to have lived on this earth, to be citizens of a country which, despite its many serious imperfections, remains the most free, the most open, the most just society in all of human history. The first true meritocracy, where every person can rise as high and as far as talent, willingness to work will take them. We have much to do to make that a reality for every member of our society. But we ought not to be part of the crowd that is constantly proclaiming gloom and doom and failure in our society. We are a great country and a great people, and we ought to act like it and be proud of it. And I say to you that I'm proud to be an American, very proud to be of Irish heritage, and deeply, deeply honored to be chosen to serve as the Grand Marshal of this great celebration of the enormous contribution that Irish Americans have made to this country, of the great freedom that we as Americans enjoy. Thank you all very much.
Gentlemen, we can't top that. Our thanks again to His Eminence, who needs to be off to another event. And again, my thanks to all of you for coming, for helping to make what I think will, without question, be the 2016 parade the most inclusive and I think the best historical parade in our 255-year history. And again, one final thanks from all of you to our outstanding Grand Marshal for 2016, Senator Mitchell.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is some information at the door on Antons, and stuff will be put in the mail and will be available on the website as of this evening. Thank you very much for coming.